Market integration.
So good day, sir, and I am Raven Josh Aison, and I will be discussing to you about the market integration. So it is stated by Robson from 1998. Market integration is a state of affairs or a process involving attempts to combine national economies into larger region. So, ayun po ang sabi niya. So, what does it mean? It means to build a bigger nation or to combine an organization. Group of goods often move proportionally to each other, and when this relation is very clear among different market, it is said that the market is integrated. So it's about the relationship between different countries, different country markets. It's all about combining and bringing all together in one economy, as I said earlier. So example po nito is the European Union and the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So why the economy wanted the market integration or integrate their markets? So, because of the free trade. So free trade is when international trade, import or export, left to its natural course without tariffs and non-tariff trade barriers such as quotas, embargoes, sanctions, and other restrictions. It means wala kang babayarang taxes or tariffs or tarifa through trading. Because of this, goods and service can be bought and sold across international borders without limitation or restriction like government tariffs, like I said earlier, quota subsidies or prohibition to inhibit their exchange. So let's proceed sa international financial institution. So an international financial institution is a financial institution that has been established by more than one country and hence is subject to international law. This to reduce global poverty, improve people's living condition and standards, to support sustainable economic and social and institutional development, and to provide regional cooperation and integration. So it plays a major role in the social and economic development programs of nations with developing or transitional economies. So this role includes advising and developing projects, funding them, and assisting them in their implementation. So sila yung mga nagpupondo, yung nagpapahiram ng pera sa bansa natin, para sa mga plano ng bansa natin. So next is global corporation. So it's a large company that operates in many different countries. The headquarters of the global corporation are based in Canada. Mga example ng global corporation is like the Jollibee, yung sa atin, yung Nestle, yung Adobe, American Express, and many more.
Economic development during and after World War II.
Economic development during and after World War II. Prior to the World War II, economic globalization has been experienced throughout the world, but when the World War II started, it collapsed and also brought about by economic depression. In 1939, all of these events have negative effect on almost all major economies. The U.S. economy was a major exception, at least in terms of the effect of the two world wars, because they believed that World War II was ultimately a dispute between foreign nations, and that the United States has no good reason to get involved. The best policy they claimed was for the United States to build own defenses and avoid antagonizing either side. Of particular importance in 1930s, was the movement of many countries, notably fascist Italy and Germany, in the direction of autarky. Autarky is economic independence or self-sufficiency, an economic system of limited trade and closed economy. In the turn inward in order to create as much economic self-sufficiency as possible. Such a turn inward is, of course, anathema. Anathema is something or someone that vehemently dislike. Anathema to globalization, which require that buyers in ties, including nation-state, be outward-looking rather than inward-looking, not only in the way they view the world, but also in their actual dealings with other parts of the world. Historically, societies have utilized different levels of autarky. The mercantilist policy followed by Western European countries from the 16th to 18th century, which tried to augment state power in part by limiting international trade, where autarky, a more extensive form of autarky, was pursued by Nazi Germany in 1933 to 1945, which tried to maximize trade within its own economic bloc and to eliminate it with outsiders. Nazi Germany still pursued major international trade, albeit under a different system, to escape the terms of Treaty of Versailles. Satisfied by business elites and prepare for war, the regime would continue to conduct trade, including with countries that United States, including connection with major companies that like IBM and Coca-Cola. Even during wartime, American outputs steadily grew as the physical damage done to the country was limited to Hawaii and some overseas military bases. This allowed Americans to buckle down and work on bolstering industry rather than having to focus on rebuilding what was lost. Conversely, many countries in Europe suffered extensive damage to buildings and infrastructure, so the end of World War was a time for extensive rehabilitation. However, the end of war also marked the beginning of a period of expansive growth for Europe and other nations. For the second whole of the 20th century, the United States, Europe, and Japan experienced amazing gains. In fact, GDP per capita in Europe tripled in the second half of the 20th century. Following the war, America used to footing post-war to become a global superpower. What happened that after had won the war in 1945 and defeat the force of evil in the world? The hardship of previous 15 years of war and depression were replaced by rising living standard, increased opportunity, and a new beginning emerging American culture confident of its future and place in the world. One of the theories behind what allows such prolific growth in a region ravaged by war is that the end of World War II and the instability of the previous decades presented Europe with the opportunity for catch-up growth. Since the years between World War I and World War II were rife with the global economic instability, Europe had not had to implement many of the advancements pioneered in the US and elsewhere, where America were developing new technology such as nylon and Teflon and making important advancement in areas such as automotive industry. Many Europeans were still hitting their economies with the coal. Basically, the non-stop turmoil or the pre-war years left little time for advancement on the continent. However, once the war ended, all these new technologies and advancement in business and industry become able to economy newly able and ready to embrace them. People work in wartime as soldiers and nurses now needed jobs, and American advancement during the preceding years provided the perfect blueprint for how to use this newly available workforce. These and other factors contribute to an upswing in GDP of Europe that presented well into 1970. Bretton Woods and Bretton Woods system. A Bretton Woods system is a key factor in depression was thought to be a lack of cooperation among nation-states. The lack of cooperation was associated with a high tariff and other import restriction, and for protectionist practices as well as the propensity of governments to devalue their currency in order to gain an edge in global trade over other countries. The latter also made exchange rate wars among the nations involved more likely. Those concerned were the backdrop for the creation of the Bretton Woods system, its five key elements. First, we have each participating should state establish a par value for its currency expressed in terms of gold, equivalently in terms of the gold value of the US dollar. Secondly, the official monetary authority in each country, a central bank or its equivalent, would agree to exchange its own currency for those of other country at the established exchange rate plus or minus percent margin. Third, the International Monetary Fund (IMF) was created to establish, stabilize, and oversee exchange rate. Fourth, the member states agreed to eliminate at least eventually all restriction on the use of its currency for international trade. And five, the entire system was based on the US dollar at the end of the World War II. The US had about three-fourths of the world gold supply and accounted for over one-fifth of the world export. And the Bretton Woods system is the one that helped to fix the economy and to end of economic depression in the worst affected areas as well in the various countries that have been affected too, and regulate the course of the economy that continues to grow and has a smooth interaction in all countries.
General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade GATT.
GATT, or the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, was an international trade agreement. It was signed by 23 nations, including Canada in 1947, and came into effect on January 1, 1948. It was refined over 8 rounds of negotiations, which to lead the creation of the World Trade Organization, or WTO. It replaced the GATT on January 1, 1995. The GATT was focused on trade in goods. It aimed to liberalize trade by reducing tariffs and removing quotas among member countries. Each member of the GATT was expected to open its markets equally to other member nations, removing trade discrimination. So that agreements negotiated through GATT reduced average tariffs on industrial goods from 40% 1947 to less than 5% 1993. It was an early step towards economic globalization. So, what a tariff? A tariff, also called custom duty, tax levied upon goods as they cross nation boundaries, usually by the government of the importing country. The words tariff, duty, and custom can be used interchangeably.
World Trade Organization WTO.
World Trade Organization. World Trade Organization is a multilateral organization headquartered in Geneva, Switzerland, with 152 members nations as of 2008. As of present, 159 members countries. Its focus on trade places is it at the heart of economic globalization and has made it a magnet for those opposed either to the broader process of trade liberalizations and promotion or to some specific aspect of WTO or World Trade Organization operation. It is continues to be concerned with tariff barriers as well as restriction on trade in services. The WTO also deals with other type of protectionism. Then, what is World Trade Organization? The WTO has many roles. It operates a global system of trade rules. It acts a forum for negotiating trade agreements. It settles trade disputes between its members and it supports the needs of developing countries. All major decisions are made by WTO's or World Trade Organization member governments, either by minister who usually meet at least every 2 years, or by their ambassadors or delegates who meets regularly in Geneva. Then, a number of simple fundamental principles form the foundation of the multilateral trading system. Ayun yung, kumbaga, stand for natin. Then, the primary purpose of WTO is the open trade for the benefit of all. And that's all. Thank you.
International Monetary Fund, IMF.
So hi everyone, I am Lance Matthew Ailines, the next reporter. So I'm going to discuss about the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. So I'm going to discuss first is all about the International Monetary Fund. So what is International Monetary Fund? The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, works to achieve sustainable growth and prosperity for all of its 100 member countries. The goal of the IMF is the macroeconomic stability for both economic nations and the global economy. So, the reason why there is IMF is because they are the only one who supports the economic policies that promote financial stability and monetary cooperation, which is essential to the increased productivity, job creation, and economic well-being. The IMF is governed by the accountable to its member countries. So what does the IMF do? The IMF has three critical missions: furthering the international monetary cooperation, encouraging the expansion of trade and economic growth, and discouraging policies that would harm the prosperity. To fulfill this mission, IMF member countries work collaboratively with each other and with other international bodies. It does by support the economic policies that promote financial stability and monetary cooperation, which are essential to increase productivity, job creation, and economic well-being. So, fast facts about IMF. 1944 year, the IMF was established. There is 190 member countries, 150 nationalities represented by the staff, 24 executive directors representing 190 member countries, $1 trillion total amount of the IMF was able to loan to its member countries, zero interest rate on loans to low-income countries. So that's all for the International Monetary Fund. So the next topic is World Bank. The World Bank. So what is the World Bank? The World Bank, officially the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, is the most important element of the World Bank government. The IBRD, or the bank, was established in 1944 at Bretton Woods and began operations in 1946. Membership is open for all member states of the IMF. So the World Bank is an international organization dedicated to provide financial advice and research to developed nations. To aid their economic advancement, the bank predominantly acts as the organizations that attempt to fight poverty by offering developmental assistance to middle and low-income countries. So currently, the World Bank has two stated goals that it aims to achieve in 2030. The first is to end extreme poverty by decreasing the number of people living less than $1.90 a day to below 3% of the world population. The second is to increase overall prosperity by increasing income growth in the bottom 40% of country in the world. So what does the World Bank provide? Based on what I've said in the first slide, the World Bank provides financing advice and the resources to the developing countries in the area of education, public safety, health, and other areas of needs. Often nations, organizations, and other institutions partner with the World Bank to sponsor development projects. So it also provides technical assistance and policy advice and supervises on behalf of the international creditors the implementation of free market reforms together with the International Monetary Fund or IMF and the World Trade Organizations. It plays a central role in overseeing economic policy and reforming public institutions in developing countries and defining the global macroeconomic agenda. So, difference between IMF and World Bank. So, the World Bank Group works with developing countries to reduce poverty and increase shared prosperity, while the International Monetary Fund serves to stabilize the international monetary system and acts as a monitor of the world's currencies. So, next is IMF give loan to member countries only, whereas World Bank can give financial aid to anyone. So the objective is IMF deal with all the issues related to the financial sector and macroeconomics. World Bank is to lessen the poverty and promote the long-term development and infrastructure of the economy. The IMF focuses on the economy stability, but World Bank's main focus is towards economic growth. The IMF also provides loans and helps countries develop policy programs that solve balance of payment problems in a country cannot obtain sufficient financing to meet its international obligations. So whereas World Bank helps countries to reform inefficient economic sectors and implement specific problems such as building health centers and schools or making clean water and electricity more available. World Bank assistance is typically term funded by the countries that are members of the bank through the issuing of bonds. So that's all for me. So I hope you learned something. That's all. Thank you.
Bretton Woods systems.
First, what is Bretton Woods system? According to Wikipedia, Bretton Woods system is the first system used to control the value of money in different countries. It meant that each country had to have a monetary policy that kept the exchange rate within a fixed value of plus or minus 1% in terms of gold. The Bretton Woods institutions or BWIs, the International Monetary Fund or IMF, and the World Bank were created to bring about the orderly development of the world economy in the post-World War II era. This chapter makes an attempt to suggest broad directions of reform. It employs historical and institutional approaches in trying to understand the sources of failures and limitations of the BWIs. A detailed blueprint for reform would require much technical and analytical work on specific issues, but at this stage, it is more important to forge a consensus on the direction of reform. In the 21st century, the organization that was formed by the Bretton Woods, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization are undergoing dramatic changes. The major economies in the world that suffered because of the World War I, and it is the greatest depression of the people in 1930s and World War II. Why? Because of the fear of the recurrences of lack of cooperation among the nation-states, political instability, and economic turmoil, especially on the World War II. Recent changes in the organizations are traceable to several major forces, including globalization, major trade disputes, and the increasing power and ambition of growing economic powers, especially in Asia. Founded in 1944, the World Bank Group, the International Monetary Fund, are three intergovernmental institutions that are influential in shaping the structure of the world's development and financial order, also known as the Bretton Woods institutions. They were initially created with the intention of rebuilding the international economic system following World War II. The key decision leading to the establishment of the both institutions were largely steered by the US and to a lesser extent the UK. And during the post-war period, the BWIs were significantly influenced by the US political strife. Their mandates, focus on programs have evolved greatly over time, as seen, for example, by the shape of their pivotal role as designers of the fixed exchange rate regime created by the Bretton Woods system, to their active promotion of a fluctuating exchange rate system after its collapse in 1973. Their functions are detailed in the World Bank's and IMF's respective articles of agreement.
The critique of the Bretton Woods system.
Good day, I'm going to discuss the critique of the Bretton Woods system. One of the most effective critiques of the Bretton Woods system era organization is the noted economist Joseph E. Stiglitz. Joseph Stiglitz is a heretic well known as the most prestigious critic of the International Monetary Fund and the Washington Consensus. Stiglitz has voiced his views in the corridors of power. In 1993, he became a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisers and later on he became chairman. That's why his critique is especially powerful because he had a great practical experience. As a chairman of the Council of Economic Advisers, Stiglitz was the highest official charged with analyzing the impact of economic policies on Americans. In that role, he cautioned against pre-market shock therapy for Russia. Then, in 1997, he became chief economist of the World Bank, where he tried to push the institution in a more progressive direction. He was the top official responsible for analyzing how economic decisions affected the world's poor. He also stepped up his criticisms of IMF and US economic policies toward Russia and East Asia. He had antagonized officials at the International Monetary Fund and within the Clinton administration by criticizing the response to the financial crisis in Asia and their strategy for encouraging the development of democratic capitalism in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. These criticisms did not endear him to Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers, who allegedly pushed him out of the World Bank in December 1999. Stiglitz resigned from the World Bank in January 2000, a month before his term expired, and said the decision to leave had been his. On his interview in June 2011, according to him, the IMF is controlled by finance ministers and bank governors who have created policies that favor the financial community. Furthermore, the World Bank's support for the Washington Consensus, a set of policies that promote stabilization, liberalization, and privatization of the economy, is damaging because of its emphasis on the regulation. Instead, policies should help countries develop the right regulatory structure. Ultimately, there must a greater adherence to democratic principles by the Bretton Woods institution, says Stiglitz. Since leaving the bank, Stiglitz has sharpened his criticism further, making embarrassing revelations about the role of the IMF in the Russian loan scandal, among other things. His critique is especially powerful. It is the fact that this is a critic from within rather than from those who are in the periphery of the system and who feel they are being exploited by it that gives Stiglitz's argument so much power. In mid-2000, he joined faculty of Columbia University, and on October 10, 2001, it was announced that he would be awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Science for his work on the theory of information asymmetry. For Stiglitz, globalization is defined as the removal of barriers to free trade and the closer integration of national economies. He said that economic globalization can be a positive force and can enrich everyone in the world, including the poor. However, he said that this has not been the case because of the way globalization is being handled, and especially international trade agreements have been managed, including their imposition on less developed nations. As a result, Stiglitz sees an increase in global poverty as well as growing gap between the global rich and the global poor. That's it. Thank you.
Economic organization.
Other important economic organizations. The first is the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is a board group at the moment 30 development nations. The OECD is the most encompassing club of the world's rich countries. It has little formal power but is highly influential. OECD is an international organization in which governments work together and find solutions to common challenges, development global standards, share experience, and identify best practices to promote better policies for better trips. Second, why OECD is important? Well, OECD important because shaping the global economy agenda and informing economic policies. Next is, what are the achievements of OECD? Siyempre, may achievements sila. So, OECD is member countries' contribution about 63% of the world GDP. Third quarters of world trade, 95% of world official development assistance, over half of the world's energy contribution, and 18% of the world populations. The European Union or EU is a product of post-WW Second Era as well as the Bretton Woods era and now encompass 27 member states. It's the largest domestic market in the development world, soon to be surpassed by China, with over 500 million citizens. The European Union or EU is a unique economic and political union between 27 European countries. The predecessors of the EU was created in the aftermath of the Second World War. Why European Union is important? So, European Union important because the UE is the largest trade bloc in the world. It is the world's biggest exporter and manufactured goods and services, and the biggest import market for over 100 countries. Free trade among its members was one of the EU's founding principles. This is possible thanks to the single market. The North America Free Trade Agreement of NAFTA came into effect on January 1, 1994. It was based on the idea that the US, Canada, and Mexico were to eliminate most barriers to the trade and investment over the ensuing 15 years. The first is the North America Free Trade Agreement was an agreement signed by Canada, Mexico, and the United States that create a real free trade bloc in North America. The agreement came into force on the January 1, 1994 and suspended in 1988. Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement between the United States and Canada. NAFTA important because boosted trade and eliminated all tariffs among the three countries. It's also a trade agreement on international rights for business inventors that reduce the cost and commercial spurs investment and grow, especially for small businesses. Achievement. NAFTA achievement is the easing trade between 450 million people in three countries. NAFTA more than quadrupled trade in 20 years. This boosted economic growth in the all three countries. It also lead to the lower price on groceries and oil in the United States. Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries or OPEC was formed in 1960 and including the major oil exporters Iran, Iraq, Hawaii, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. There are now 11 members: Indonesia, Argentina, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, and the United Arab and Emirates have been added. Organization of petroleum exporting countries o OPEC, was founded in 1960 and including the major oil exporting Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Venezuela. There are now 11 members: Indonesia, Argentina, Libya, Nigeria, Qatar, and the United Arab.
Thank you for listening. I hope you learned.